talks. We have more. We're joined next by theater, film, and opera director Julie Taymor. Her most recent film, Frida, a biography of the Mexican artist Frida Kahlo, received 6 Oscar nominations and won 2 Oscars, including one for Best Original Score. Julie Taymor is the creator of the Broadway mega hit The Lion King, the musical, which won 2 Tony Awards for Best Direction of Musical and for Taymor's own original costume designs. She made her feature film debut in 1999 with Titus, based on Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus, starring Anthony Hopkins and Jessica Lange. Talking about the relevance of this story, about violence to today's audience, she said, "Our entertainment industry thrives on the graphic details of murder, rapes, and villainy, yet it is rare to find a film or play that not only reflects on these dark events, but also turns them inside out, probing and challenging our fundamental beliefs on morality and justice." She's noted for her use of a wide range of cultural and historical material, including puppetry, and the ease with which she moves among different genres, from the Disney-inspired musical to Shakespearean tragedy, from film to classical opera. Many awards, the MacArthur Fellowship, Guggenheim, 2 Obie Awards. She admits that she's wary of technology for technology's sake. When it comes to art, Julie Taymor says, "I know I sound very old-fashioned, but I think it'll all keep coming down to sweat and blood and sex and things passing from one mouth to another, and airspace, and things that just don't change about what it is to be human." This fall, she will direct a new production of The Magic Flute for the Metropolitan Opera. She is collaborating right now with Elliot Goldenthal on an original opera, Grendel, to premiere at the Los Angeles Opera in 2006. Please join me in welcoming Julie Taymor.
First of
Oracula, mentita sunt oracula, qui rex in capiendus, nato mio,
very rare and very expensive, I hasten to add.
If you think I'm going to sleep with you just because you're taking me under your wing, you're wrong.
I was painting murals and womanizing in peace when you came along.
To Diego and Frida.
Diego and Frida!
was the proudest prisoner of the Goths, that we may sacrifice his flesh.
Victorious Titus, spare my firstborn son.
Religiously, they ask a sacrifice.
I'll find a day to massacre them all.
This was thy daughter.
He that wounded her hath hurt me more than had he killed me dead.
We went from Japan with Oedipus Rex. That's where I did that with Seiji Ozawa and an incredible cast of opera singers. Greek mythology, cycladic art in Japan. And then we went to an Edgar Allan Poe story, which I set almost in a Sienese painted Italy with the puppets. That's based on Edgar Allan Poe's short story, Hot Frog. And then we went to Mexico with Frida, and back to Italy, and actually the Colosseum that you saw was shot in Croatia, which at the time was an incredibly volatile place when we did the whole Colosseum shot. And Shakespeare via Roman history, but really not based on history coming from Greek mythology, Titus. And finally Africa, mixed with a little European pop music with the Lion King. So like my compatriots over here, I think there's something that we all as artists would call border crossing, which is something that is very important to my heart, and I think we all know that it is something incredibly crucial at this time. As we talk about putting a mirror up to our faces, we really need to look deeply in that mirror and see the other side. So when we as artists put this mirror up to what is going on in our lives, we don't necessarily put up a mirror like reality TV. We don't put up the mirror that is exactly reflecting what we look like. What we try to do is to almost do a cubistic mirror, to put up a mirror where we see this side of our face, the back of our head, the bottom of our being, the inside of our soul, so that our audiences, our garden walkers, our listeners, are able to see an image that they hadn't seen before. We take them into a journey, on a journey, that is something that they can potentially reflect upon, connect to, but takes them to a place of awe. It's one of my favorite ideas of this notion of what is awe. And as we see a world that becomes more and more technological and on the one hand, and yet increasingly religious on the other, which almost seems an impossibility, we have to question what is the power of each, and where does each of these powers, where do they get used for the potential of creativity, positivity? Because there's no reason to condemn either when you can see the incredible inspirational creations that happen from both. So I'm going to tell you a story that happened to me in Indonesia when I was on a traveling fellowship in my early 20s, many years ago. And that quote was really weird. I don't know where that quote came from, but I enjoyed that weird blood and whatever, the oozing quote. But anyway, this is an experience that happened to me back when I had this fellowship. I went to Indonesia for 3 months and stayed 4 years. And I had already been there 2 years, and I received a Ford Foundation grant to develop a theater company, which I really wanted to do, comprising Javanese, Balinese, Sundanese masked dancers, actors, Europeans. I had this incredibly idealistic notion of bringing Eastern and Western theater together and traditional techniques of Indonesian theater with contemporary theater coming from Brook and Artaud and everything that was swarming around Grotowski in my head at the time. But at this particular moment, I had performed one show, and I was at the base of a volcano in Bali, in an old village called Trunyan, which is considered to be the original Balinese village, original Balinese culture. They didn't come from someplace else. And there was an initiation ceremony that would happen every 5 years, 5 to 10 years, for the young men of that village to be initiated, like a bar mitzvah, to be initiated into being an adult and a responsible member of the community. And I was sitting in this village, having already lived in Indonesia for 2 years, speaking Indonesian, and I was sitting listening to the various sounds of the gamelan orchestras that had come from all these different villages to celebrate. And it was almost a Charles Ivesian experience as you hear them all floating at the same time. I was under this gigantic banyan tree with the roots going down into the earth. It was a full moon. There's no electricity, just the moon to light everything. And as I was just very peacefully sitting there, I could see way in the back of this temple space that I was in, outdoor temple space, these glinting mirrors that started to shine. And out of the darkness, 20 men, old men in full barras costume, came and they started to dance. And there was no audience. They had full costumes, incredible detail, makeup, the music. The music was the music of their voices. There was no music. They didn't see me. I was hidden in the shadows of a tree. And they came out and performed with this incredible sound emanating from somewhere deep down for, it seemed like an eternity, but it was probably 20 minutes, this warrior dance with spears. And I'm 21 years old. I've been in theater, in Boston Children's Theater, since I was 11 years old, Theater Workshop of Boston, the whole thing, Herbert Blaud over. I'd done a lot of theater, studied mime in Paris. I was sitting there absolutely dumbfounded as this extraordinary performance went on. For who? So beautiful, so detailed, so rich. For whom were they dancing? There were no critics. There was no audience. There was no light, except from someplace else. And it was one of those seminal moments in my life that has never, ever, ever, ever gone away. So I take that, and by the way, at the end of this extraordinary performance, the old men disappeared, went back over into a bent position, which I saw a lot in Indonesia and Bali, in the trance that would make people rise up, and then they'd return to this position. And at that moment, when all the men disappeared, a young man came out with a propane lantern, hung the lantern up on a tree. They put out a curtain, the square filled with young people, and all night long they had lights and candy and food, and there was an orchestra, and then we had our theater all night long for the human beings after these men had finished their performance. And this notion of performing, I'm in the theater, I'm in films, I'm in a communicative art. I'm in an art that tells stories. I'm in an art that cares about its audience. I'm in an art that wants to have a reaction, that wants to have that back and forth with, that there's that feeling that when I do something, I'm hoping for transformation. I'm hoping that somebody comes out of what they've seen changed forever. But there was something also about that first performance that reminded me that if I'm going to make a corset for the lionesses in The Lion King, if it's made out of stone and beads and clay, And it's worn by those ladies, and maybe past the 10th row, no one can see it. It could have been plastic. I'll know it's not plastic. The women wearing it will know it's not plastic. The people sewing it and creating all those hand-blocked prints. When you think of Disney, you think of everything mass-produced, everything coming out. Every single piece was handmade, was hand-done. We make molds later to be able to repeat, but all the sculpture. And I found in that experience that when the artists who made, the craftsmen behind the scenes made it, it infused it with something. It infused it with something incredibly powerful, a certain spirit that is untouchable. You can't, but it's there, and when the women go out on that stage and they dance, they feel the difference. And why am I attracted to myths? I look at these pieces that I've done, and this questioning today was, well, what are you doing next? And you heard I'm doing the Magic Flute at the Metropolitan Opera, which I did once before in Florence at the Maggio Musicale for Zuin conducted. And this is an incredible tale, the Magic Flute, a journey of a coming-of-age tale. It's a classic based on classic myths, based on the Tempest, based on the goddess Kali, the queen of the night. It's definitely the inspiration for that story, besides the Masonic material and the ritual rites of whatever that was. It was also about the pull between the dark forces, the light, between the intellect and the magic, between the technological and the emotional, between the concrete and the ephemeral. That's something that is very attractive to me. I look at the projects that I'm coming up with, and I'll name a few of them. The Grendel project is an opera that will have taken 20 years for Elliot and I to get on stage. And the reason I have many projects is because of that. Because we don't know when these things are going to get produced, and we have to keep them going. And it's a little tricky and difficult to do more than one thing at a time, but it's just the way it goes. We have to. So my head has to keep shifting from one medium to another, from one story. But what I'm looking at when I think about these is Grendel is based, John Gardner's novella based on the Beowulf legend, which is the story from the monster's point of view, from the outsider, the 20th century outsider. And what we're doing is we're taking the original Beowulf in Old English, the Danish legend. Now I'm up into some northern ice, snow country, away from the southern climate. And we're taking the Old English and the English simultaneously, and the monster will sing in English because I want the audience to identify with the monster. It's very important that he is our language. And then all the human beings will be singing in Old English. Then I'm working on another version of Black Orpheus, the Brazilian, you may have seen the Brazilian movie that came out many years ago. And when I met Caetano Veloso, who did the end title song to Frida, the Brazilian composer, they invited me to take that Orpheus set in Brazil and reconceive it. And here again, you have a myth that many people know. If they don't, it'll resonate. What is the power of myth? What is myth, actually? I'm not Joseph Campbell up here, but I have noticed that I'm attracted to the Flying Dutchman myth, the Orpheus myth, the Oedipus myth, the outsider myth. If you look at many of these things, even Titus itself, the imagery of the tree comes from the Greek myths. These stories, these myths that we tell and retell, and I think try and make, not necessarily keep them in a pristine, distant form, but they're living now. These myths are living now. These are opportunities, whether they're comic books, Spider-Man, Harry Potter's, or whatever, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, they allow us to completely fulfill the unbelievable, the impossible. They allow you to go through with an experience that in the banal, everyday world is impossible. The Transposed Heads by Thomas Mann, I'm working on, we just found out yesterday, we may be able, I started in 1984, so this is a long, long time. We may be able to do a movie musical of this. This is an Indian legend that Thomas Mann adapted, set in India. I'm setting it in Manhattan, contemporary India, and then it goes into mythological India where heads can get transposed. If you want to be that person, well, then just take the head and take yours off and put it on. We do it in our imaginations, but the arts film, theater, opera, music, all of it, visuals, allow us to fulfill that. Sometimes it's an exorcism. Sometimes it is just the completion of an experience. The Lion King is very much one of those. There isn't a country that we have it in 9 countries where it does not have resonance to that culture. One story is the second production of Lion King was in Japan. And I was shooting Titus at the time. I went and I cast it with the Japanese producer, but I didn't have much to do with the rehearsal. My team had to go over. When I finally went over to the opening of The Lion King in Japan, I was absolutely wrecked. I was crying because my father fought in Japan. He was in the Navy and he fought in the war. And now I was coming. I had been to Japan on that fellowship when I was 21, had seen Kabuki, had seen Bunraku, all of the theatrical forms, contemporary theater of Japan. Now, if you think about the circle of life of The Lion King, I was coming full circle back to Japan, watching an extraordinary Japanese company do fabulous mask and puppet work, better than the Americans, because it's a tradition that is very profound in Japan. And everybody, it was in Japanese and African languages. We keep the African languages. And this was where we fought a war. It was so moving to me to be there to see this company that it really reinforced the power of what I get to do and all of us get to do to show that the connections and the situations, just like the music that could be by a hair, by an inflection change, be the same core. They're the same music. It's coming from the same place. It might look a little differently. And what we have to do is we have to really, really look at those differences. When 9/11 happened, I had one of those Bill Moyers moments. And right away for me it was, this is a sign for us to look at ourselves from another perspective. That's what we need to do. We have to know why we're the demon. Why are we the devil? And we as artists have that opportunity to show a mirror in a different angle. That's what I have to say today. Thank you.
Julie Taymor, it's wonderful to have you back in Boston. Do you feel the doors of perception flying open this morning? What a great foursome. Thanks to all of you, but Julie, great. Where does her passion come from? From the base of a volcano in Bali at midnight? Not a bad place to start. I'm struck there, looking at this chasm between technology and religion. Maybe technology and the arts. We're getting a lot of each in these 2 days, far from the banal every day. And what a pleasure it is. Julie Taymor looking beyond, beneath technology to myth and bodily fluids and light and dark and magic and her word, awe. It's good to remember that here maybe ultimately is